The morning dew still clung to the petals when I heard the clicking of designer heels on the gravel path leading into the garden. I didn't even need to look up to know who it was. In this town, only one person would be bold enough to wear Valentinos and stomp through the flower beds my father had planted with his own hands. Clarissa. I kept trimming the white roses, my father's favorites, and the ones he'd grown specially for my wedding. A wedding that was supposed to last a lifetime but ended in divorce, and a scar that never quite healed. My ex-husband, Ethan, now lives with Clarissa, his former personal assistant, and the woman who barged into my marriage without a second thought. Still playing in the dirt, Lauren? Her voice dripped sweet like syrup laced with sarcasm. I set the shears in the basket, straightened my back, and dusted off my gloves. Hello, Clarissa. I assume you're here because of the will reading tomorrow? She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with arrogance. Yes? Ethan and I thought it would be better if we spoke ahead of time, civilly. I nodded slightly, keeping my composure. I don't think there's anything to discuss. This is my father's house. Everything here belonged to him. Clarissa smiled, her lips painted in flawless crimson. Belonged to him, yes. But he's gone. My grip tightened around the pruning shears. Growing up in this estate, I knew every brick, every blade of grass. My father wasn't easily swayed. He would never leave anything to someone who betrayed his daughter. Clarissa raised an eyebrow, stepping forward until her shadow fell over the flower bed. Is that what you think? Then I guess you haven't spoken to your brother. Brian sees things differently. A chill ran down my spine. Since the funeral, Brian and I had barely spoken. Even during the condolences, he'd stood beside Ethan in silence, as if we were no longer family. You talked to Brian? Clarissa tilted her head, satisfaction plain on her face. Oh, we've met a few times. He's been very cooperative. I remembered what my father used to say when I was little. White roses symbolize new beginnings, but sometimes they need someone strong enough to cut off the dying branches. I stared directly at Clarissa. Get off my land before I forget how to be polite. She laughed, the sound sharp like shattering glass. Your land? That's cute. You really think just because Mr. Miles was your father you get to keep everything? I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. This house, this garden. My father built it all. He designed every room, every path. To him, it wasn't just a house. It was a legacy. Clarissa shrugged. A legacy is still money, and money always finds a way to be divided. She turned to leave, but paused at the garden gate, glancing back. You might want to start packing. Ethan and I will need at least a month to renovate before we move in. I watched her walk away, her smug steps crushing the pristine white petals beneath her heels. I looked down, realizing my hand was trembling, crushing a bloom in my grip without even noticing. Suddenly, my eyes caught a small envelope peeking out from beneath the rosebush. The corner of the paper was damp from dew. I bent down to pick it up. And for a moment, my heart stopped. That handwriting, unmistakable, was my father's. I gently smoothed the edge of the letter, tears threatening to fall despite my promise not to cry again. Maybe he had prepared for this. Maybe he was still protecting me in his own way. All right, Clarissa, I whispered, my gaze sharpening toward the garden gate. Let the games begin. I rushed into the house, clutching the envelope with my father's handwriting, my heart tangled in emotions I couldn't name. Outside the window, Clarissa was gone, but her footprints remained imprinted on the white gravel path. Every step felt like a challenge I couldn't ignore. In my father's study, the faint scent of tobacco still lingered, blending with the oak of his favorite desk. Nothing had changed since the funeral. I sat down in the leather chair, my hands shaking as I opened the letter. The paper inside held only a few lines, but they made my heart race. My dear Lauren, if you're reading this, Clarissa has likely shown her true colors. I don't have much time left, but enough to prepare for what I know is coming. Use the key enclosed to open the bottom right drawer of my desk. Everything you need is inside. And remember, chess isn't a game of luck. It's an art of foresight. Lie down. I turned the envelope over and a small key fell out, its metal glinting under the warm light. As my fingers touched the drawer, the phone rang. It was Savannah, my best friend from college and our family lawyer for the past 4 years. Lauren, I just got a notice from Clarissa and Ethan's legal team. They want to discuss a fair asset distribution before tomorrow's will reading. I let out a bitter laugh. Asset distribution, what, is the house a birthday cake now? Clarissa didn't come just to stir things up. She knows exactly what she's doing, and if Ethan's backing her, this isn't just a stunt. I gripped the phone tightly. Savannah, can you come over right now? There's something I need you to see. She didn't hesitate. 20 minutes? And Lauren? Don't open that drawer alone. I hung up, but my eyes stayed locked on the tiny key. Despite wanting to listen to her advice, I couldn't wait. Something deep inside told me my father had left more than a message. The key turned smoothly in the lock and the drawer opened as if it had been waiting for me. Inside was a thick folder, a small USB drive, and an old photo of my father and me standing in front of this house. I was maybe 10, holding a tiny potted plant while he smiled with pride in his eyes. I hadn't even gotten through all the documents when the doorbell rang. Savannah stepped in, her expression more serious than usual. "What's going on, Lauren?" she asked, closing the door behind her. I handed her the folder and pointed to the USB. My dad knew. All of it. Clarissa. Savannah put on her glasses and opened the folder. Printed pages, photographs, and notes spilled out. Each sheet revealed pieces of a story I'd never known. Clarissa appeared in several pictures, meeting with strangers. One man in particular stood out, though I didn't recognize him. But the notes were clear. Gregory Blackwell, former shareholder ousted from Miles & Co. "This is a plot to seize control of your family's company, Lauren. It's not just the house. If Clarissa manages to divide the assets, she gets shares. And from there, a foothold." I sank into the chair. I thought Clarissa was just an opportunist, but this is a whole plan. Savannah plugged the USB into the computer. A video clip popped up. Clarissa was speaking with an older woman. The audio was fuzzy, but one line came through clearly as Clarissa emphasized, "As long as Lauren doesn't find out what her father hid, we still have a chance to win." I froze. She knew my dad had a plan, but not what it was. Savannah nodded. "And now, you have a weapon she didn't anticipate. But you have to play it smart. Don't strike first. Let her think she's winning." I remembered the line from my father's letter, "Chess is the art of foresight." Clarissa might think she's one move ahead, but I was beginning to see the full board. And if this was the game my father left behind, I was going to play it through. I looked at Savannah, my voice calm but steady. "Tomorrow when Clarissa walks into that will reading, she's going to think she's about to win everything." Savannah gave a knowing smile. "But she doesn't realize she's walking right into the trap your father set." I held on to the old photo, warmth rising in my chest. My father hadn't left me alone. He had taught me his final lesson. Sometimes, the strongest player isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who waits for the checkmate. Savannah flipped through the documents in the folder my father had left. Her eyes stopped at a thick bank statement, her finger tapping a highlighted figure. "Lauren, see anything strange? These transfers happened monthly for 1.5 years before your father passed. The recipient, Clarissa Davis." I squinted at the page. "But the payment reason says media consulting. My dad never hired her for anything." Savannah nodded, eyes narrowing. "Exactly. This was a cover. She found a way to get close, build rapport, then quietly siphon funds. But your dad knew. He just didn't act until he had to." I returned to the drawer and pulled out another large envelope. Inside were several photos. Clarissa meeting a man in a car, a blonde woman handing her a folder. On the back of one photo, my father's firm handwriting read, "Taken by private investigator, 11:45 a.m., rear parking lot of Chandler and York law offices." Savannah set her coffee cup down, eyes focused. "Your father knew she wasn't working alone. It wasn't just about the money. He was tracking the whole network behind Clarissa. Look at this." She opened another video from the USB already in the computer. Clarissa sat across from an older man who looked like he was wearing a nursing home uniform. "Did you know Mr. Miles revised his will?" Clarissa asked, her tone chillingly persuasive. The man nodded slowly. "Yes. I remember him mentioning a final update, but I don't recall the details. You just need to sign off that he wasn't of sound mind at the time," she continued, sliding a paper toward him. "We'll handle the rest." Savannah paused the video, silent for a moment. Direct evidence of coercion. Getting someone to falsify a statement. She knew the old will wouldn't help her, so she's trying to nullify the updated one. I shivered. If my dad hadn't planned for this. Savannah turned back to the drawer, pulling out another sheet, this one notarized with the title, Addendum, Miles Reynolds, dated February 7th last year. Here it is, Savannah said, voice steel-edged. Your father added this clause 3 days after his final diagnosis. It states, if any beneficiary attempts to dispute the estate through deceitful means, all their rights are immediately revoked. And more than that, she pointed to the last line. I read it aloud. And any such violation shall be brought before a court with all evidence provided. This is the trap Clarissa can't escape, Savannah said, her eyes flashing with resolve. She thought Mr. Miles was just another old man who could be manipulated. But he built an entire stage and waited for the curtain to drop. I leaned back in the chair, heart heavy but strangely at peace. Part of me had feared I was just being hopeful, imagining that my father had somehow prepared to protect me. But now it was clear. He hadn't just prepared. He'd engineered every step like a long, strategic game. We need to be ready for tomorrow's reading, I said, more composed now. Clarissa will bring her lawyer. Maybe even Ethan. Savannah smirked. They'll think they're about to win. They'll happily sign for their share, and then we flipped the board, I finished, feeling every heartbeat echo with my father's will. Savannah shut the laptop and gathered the documents. I'll take everything to the office for sealing. Tomorrow morning we just wait for them to walk into the trap. I nodded, but my eyes lingered on the photo of me and my father in the garden. You're the only one I trust to take care of this place, he had once told me one autumn afternoon, when the leaves turned gold behind the greenhouse. I looked out the window. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the white roses. Clarissa might strut across the paths my father laid, might try to paint herself as the new wife, but she'd never understand that this place was blood, history, and heart. And I was the only one who knew how to defend it. Tomorrow she would learn what it feels like to make the wrong move. And my father, even in death, would be the one to make the final play. Night fell as Savannah left, taking the files to the law office. I stayed behind in the stillness of the house, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoing through the hall. I wasn't used to this quiet. Since my father passed, the mansion had felt like it was holding its breath. I was just heading upstairs when the doorbell rang. Once, then twice, spaced out but firm. I walked over and opened it. Standing there was Brian, my brother, in a slightly wrinkled suit, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Can I come in?" His voice was hoarse, eyes avoiding mine. I nodded and opened the door wider, saying nothing. There was no need. We had avoided each other almost entirely since the funeral, where I watched him stand beside Ethan, my ex. As if family could be swapped out in a single afternoon. Brian entered the living room, placed a leather briefcase on the table, and sat down heavily, like the weight of everything he carried had finally caught up. "Lauren, there are things you need to know, or more accurately, things you have the right to know." I crossed my arms, leaning against the staircase railing. "After all this silence, you think I'll just sit down and listen? You have every right to be angry. But I'm not here to explain myself," he said, pulling a large envelope from his briefcase and sliding it toward me. I stared at it for a moment before stepping forward and sitting across from him. Inside was a copy of a check made out to Brian Reynolds. The number stunned me. $500,000? I looked up in disbelief. Clarissa offered that amount for me to testify that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he wrote the final will, Brian said, voice cracking. I took the check and brought it straight to Dad. I was speechless. The anger and suspicion I'd carried froze, like hitting a wall of cold air. Dad wasn't angry, Brian continued, just disappointed. But then he told me he'd been waiting for this, that he wanted to see if I would choose family. I held the copy of the check in my hand, my heart pounding. "You didn't tell me because everything had to play out just the way Clarissa expected. She needed to believe she had full control. I played the betraying brother, because Dad needed someone on the inside." I fell silent. Fragmented memories suddenly clicked together. Brian's evasive look at the funeral, his silence during family calls, the rumors of him meeting Ethan after work. It wasn't betrayal. He was protecting me in his own way. "It's all here," Brian said, unzipping his bag and pulling out a USB and several documents. Recordings of meetings, video of her with Gregory, the former shareholder Dad once sued, emails planning how to fake Dad's mental health record. There's even footage of her rehearsing a false statement on camera. I took the USB, my hand trembling. Clarissa planned this all along. "Not just that," Brian said, finally meeting my eyes. "She doesn't just want the assets. She wants to destroy you, your reputation, your standing in the company, your memories of Dad." My chest tightened. I thought she was just greedy, but now I understood. This was a calculated attack, a personal vendetta. "Why, I never did anything to her." Brian shook his head. "Because of Ethan. Because you made him pay spousal support. Because you refused to take him back. To her, you're the thorn she needs to remove to build the perfect life she wants." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dim garden. The white rose bushes stood still, as if listening. "Dad knew everything," I whispered. "He did," Brian nodded, "and he put it all in your hands, because he believed you were the only one strong enough to do what's right." I turned back, my voice soft but firm. "You'll be there tomorrow, right?" Brian looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll stand with you." "With Dad? All the way?" In the quiet house, I heard the wind rustling through the trees, like a message from somewhere far beyond words. The next morning the Vermont sky was unusually clear, as if even nature held its breath for what was to come. I stepped into the large conference room at Dawson and P. "They've arrived," Savannah said quietly, without looking back. And just like that, Clarissa walked in first, wearing a form-fitting black dress, her hair neatly styled without a strand out of place. Ethan followed behind her, looking slightly stiff but still carried the polished demeanor of someone who had once been used to attention. They sat down on the opposite side of the table. Clarissa gave me a faint smile and a nod. "Lauren," she said, "so glad you could be here." I didn't reply. I simply sat up straight, my eyes fixed on Savannah, who had now stood up and began the reading. "Thank you all for being here today," Savannah began in a professional tone. "I'm attorney Savannah Doyle, appointed by Mr. Miles Reynolds to oversee the announcement and execution of his will." Clarissa laced her fingers together, lips slightly curved. She was expecting a win. "After completing all legal procedures," Savannah continued, "the original will, drafted 2 years ago, states that Mr. Miles Reynolds' estate, including the Maple Hill Mansion, his shares in Reynolds & Co., and all current bank accounts, will be distributed as follows: 60% to Lauren Reynolds, his biological daughter, and 40% divided equally between Ethan Reynolds and Clarissa Davis, individuals closely associated with the family." Clarissa pressed her lips together and glanced at Ethan, her eyes lighting up. I saw her quietly pull a pen from her purse, as if already prepared to sign off on her share. But Savannah didn't stop. "However," she said, flipping open another folder, 3 days before his passing, Mr. Miles Reynolds added a legally binding codicil to the will. This clause applies to all beneficiaries." Clarissa blinked. "What do you mean?" Savannah offered a small smile. "I'll read it as written. Any individual receiving assets under the aforementioned will hereby consent to a full investigation into any actions involving financial fraud, bribery, or conspiracy to misappropriate property that may have occurred within the 24 months prior to my death. All evidence has been sealed and will be submitted to the authorities if this clause is activated." The room instantly froze. Ethan furrowed his brow. Clarissa slowly set her pen down, her face noticeably pale. "You're joking," Clarissa said bitterly. "Miles, he would never do that. He cared about me." Savannah slid a file across the table. "I'm afraid he saw it all coming. This contains records of suspicious transfers from Reynolds & Co., photographs of your meetings with former shareholder Gregory Blackwell, audio recordings of discussions about fabricating mental health files for Mr. Miles, and much more." Clarissa leaned forward and pushed the file away. "I don't accept this. I'm going to sue." "And by doing that you'll also trigger the clause," I said calmly. "The more you protest, the more it proves my father was right to suspect foul play." Ethan remained silent, his eyes fixed on a photo emerging from the file. Himself, standing outside another law office, exchanging documents with Gregory. We have video footage from the parking lot, Savannah added softly, and testimony from a healthcare worker Clarissa tried to bribe. We're ready to present everything to the court. Clarissa stood up suddenly, her chair crashing to the floor. This is all a setup, a scam that Lauren orchestrated. I didn't orchestrate anything, I said, staring straight at her. My father did, and he left behind more than enough proof. If you don't want a full investigation, you'd better step back now. Clarissa looked around as if searching for an exit in a room that was slowly closing in on her. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, but for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Savannah lowered her voice to conclude. You've two choices: withdraw from the inheritance, or proceed and let the authorities take it from here. The room was silent. Outside, the sound of a distant church bell rang, marking noon. But for Clarissa, it must have felt like a final warning. She stood frozen in the center of the room, her face drained of color as if every drop of blood had vanished. Ethan sat slumped beside her, hands clasped, no longer offering any resistance. Savannah gently placed her hand on the file and pushed it forward. We already delivered copies of all the evidence to the state investigators this morning, she said, her voice firm but not raised. If you'd like to clarify anything further, I'm sure the investigators would be happy to assist. Clarissa turned to me, eyes wide as if unable to comprehend what was happening. You're cruel, Lauren. You really staged this whole thing, just to bring me down? I looked at her, my voice low but every word dropping like stone into still water. I didn't stage anything, you buried yourself with your own ambition. I'm just protecting what my father left behind. The conference room door burst open, two plainclothes officers stepped in, one holding up a badge, the other holding a warrant. Clarissa Davis? The officer asked. You need to come with us to address allegations involving financial fraud and attempted misappropriation of property. Clarissa let out a laugh, but it came out crooked and bitter. You have no right to arrest me here. This is a will reading, not a trial. The warrant was signed by a judge this morning, the second officer said, stepping closer. And we are authorized to act. When the cold metal handcuffs locked around Clarissa's wrists, she finally understood that the game was over. This isn't over, she shouted, her eyes red with fury. I'll sue everyone. The more you talk, Savannah interrupted, the stronger the case becomes. Clarissa was escorted out of the room. Her once proud footsteps were now heavy, each heel hitting the floor like the fading echoes of a fallen empire. Ethan hadn't moved. He just watched her go, then suddenly bent forward and exhaled as if letting go of a mountain. What about me? He whispered. Am I being arrested too? Savannah opened the remaining folder. You signed multiple documents related to leaking confidential company information. If you cooperate and provide further evidence, you may be eligible for leniency. Ethan looked at me for the first time since the meeting started. His eyes no longer held the pride of the man who once was my husband, nor the smirk I used to know. All that remained was resignation. I didn't know it would go this far, he said quietly. I thought it was just a bit of maneuvering. I didn't think she... You chose to look the other way, I replied coldly. And now you'll pay the price for that silence. A few moments later, one of the officers returned holding a large envelope. We've just received additional intel from the feds. Clarissa Davis is actually Margaret Ellis, an alias. She's been wanted in New Jersey and Pennsylvania for defrauding 3 wealthy families, but she's evaded arrest by constantly changing her identity. Brian couldn't hide his shock. So, everything she did to our family, she's done before? That's right, the officer nodded. But she's never succeeded to this extent. Until now, until she targeted Mr. Miles and the Reynolds estate. Savannah nodded, and this time, she won't get away. We left the conference room in the late afternoon. Brian walked beside me, silent, his steps steady like a... I looked up at the sky where a single cloud drifted through the fading sunlight. Beside me, Savannah spoke softly. Your father knew who she was. He hired a private investigator before he even got sick. He didn't just protect you, he protected others from falling into this same trap. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. He always saw things coming, always saw the truth about people I never could. Brian placed a hand on my shoulder. But he believed you would learn, and he was right. I nodded, and he left a plan not just to protect us, but to remind us that justice, when paired with patience and faith, arrives right on time. Ahead of us the wind swept by, carrying dust and the rustle of late autumn leaves. And in the middle of it all I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. A new beginning. A chance to move forward, not as my father's shadow, but as myself. That evening, as the press slowly cleared from the law office grounds, Savannah and I returned home. Brian went to retrieve a few documents from the police, and all I wanted was to go back to the one safe place left, my father's estate. But I didn't expect what I was about to discover there. Something even more disturbing than the explosive will reading that morning. Savannah was the first to enter my father's library. She carefully opened a document case just returned by the police. Inside were items seized from Clarissa's apartment during the early morning search. "Lauren," she called me over, her voice noticeably heavier. "You need to see this." I walked over and Savannah handed me a slim folder, but what was inside made my spine go cold. The first page was a detailed plan, titled clearly, Post-Asset Transfer Phase, Eliminate the Lauren Reynolds Threat. My hands shook as I flipped through it. Inside was a hand-drawn floor plan of my house, with key areas circled in red: bedroom, greenhouse, back staircase. Notes like, alarm system not yet upgraded, time slots when Lauren is alone, and contact Alex to trigger security incident, made my skin crawl. What was she planning to do to me? I choked out. Savannah didn't respond right away. She handed me another document. A printed email from an anonymous account to Clarissa. The contents detailed plans to stage a spotless break-in, induce psychological panic in Lauren, and most chilling of all, send sure that if anything happens to Lauren, the estate will pass to the next heir, Ethan. "Oh my God," I whispered, my heart sinking into my stomach. "She didn't just want to steal," Savannah said in a low voice. "She wanted to eliminate you, so no one could stop her from claiming everything tied to the Reynolds legacy." I staggered back, my mind reeling. I had once thought Clarissa was just an opportunist, greedy, calculated, but not cruel. And this, Savannah added, wasn't her first time. She pulled a letter from her coat pocket, sent by the federal authorities. Inside was a report detailing Clarissa's real name, Margaret Ellis's, past scams. For over a decade she had used at least 3 different identities, targeting wealthy families through jobs or romantic ties, gradually draining their assets, even tearing apart their internal relationships. One case in Pennsylvania nearly ended in tragedy when the victim, a young woman, mysteriously disappeared shortly after her family transferred most of their assets to her new husband. That husband was later connected to Margaret, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge her. "And now, with what we've found in this file," Savannah concluded, "she won't escape this time." I dropped into the chair, a chill crawling down my spine. For years I had blamed myself for not being good enough, not smart enough to save my marriage, to protect my father, to preserve the family's name. But it turned out I wasn't the only player in this game, just the final target of a seasoned predator. "And Ethan?" I asked. "Did he know?" "There's no evidence he knew about the part involving you," Savannah said. "According to his initial statement, Clarissa kept that from him. He may have been complicit financially, but not cold enough to take it further." I didn't know whether that made me feel relieved or bitter. Either way, he was still the man who chose to The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. It was Brian. "Lauren," he said, voice low, "the police want you at the station tomorrow. They found another detailed plan in Clarissa's safe. Looks like she was plotting a car accident." I didn't hear the rest. The sound around me blurred. One thought repeated in my mind. She really had planned to erase me from this life. I looked out the window. The sky had turned a deep violet, with a few early stars blinking into view. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing I knew for sure. I was still here. Still breathing. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not Margaret Ellis, not anyone, erase me from the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim. The next morning, while the mist still clung to the maple trees in the garden, I stepped into my father's greenhouse, the place I hadn't dared to enter until now. Ever since the funeral, I had avoided the frosted glass door as if his breath and warmth still lingered inside. But today, I needed to face it. Not with pain, but with gratitude. The greenhouse was just as peaceful as I remembered. The scent of lavender, fresh soil, and my father's favorite purple orchids filled the air. I walked to the old work table where he used to plant new seedlings. In the center sat a small wooden box engraved with my name, covered in a fine layer of dust. I opened the lid with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of neatly tied papers and a folded letter. I pulled the letter out and immediately recognized my father's familiar slanted handwriting. To Lauren, my daughter. If you're reading this, then everything must have reached its end. I know how strong you've had to be to get through it all. I took a deep breath, holding back tears, and read on. I bought the plot next to your old flower shop on Walnut Street 3 months before I passed. The deed and trademark for Lauren's Garden Haven are in the envelope below. Don't let the past weigh you down, Lauren. Plant again, build again, love again. And this time, let it grow your way. A real garden needs sunlight, but it also needs the rain. And you are the one who will bring the spring. Forever loving you. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. His words pierced through the armor I had worn for so long and reached the most fragile part of me. Beneath the letter were legal documents transferring ownership of a 2-acre plot adjacent to my old flower shop, the one I abandoned after Ethan left. There was also a printed logo for Lauren's Garden Haven, a brand my father had secretly registered for me. Not Harrison & Co., not the family name. It was mine, and mine alone. That afternoon I invited Brian and Savannah to visit the land with me. Standing on the open field, I felt as though my father was still watching from somewhere, smiling, proud. Weeds covered the ground, but the soil was rich, ready to welcome the first seeds. He prepared everything for you, Savannah said, carefully unrolling a design from the stack of papers. He even hired a landscape architect to create a seasonal garden layout. Brian stood silently for a long time, then turned to me. Are you going to start construction soon? I nodded. As soon as possible. I don't want to waste another day looking back. That very evening I started calling gardeners, designers, plant suppliers, even old employees from the flower shop. Messages came pouring in. Most were surprised, but almost all of them said the same thing. Lauren, if you rebuild, we'll come back. At night I returned to the greenhouse. On the table, a purple orchid was just beginning to bloom. I bent down and placed a small wooden plaque beneath it, engraved with the words, "For what never had the chance to bloom, and what will live on." My father didn't just leave me protection. He left me hope, a path, and a seed of something new. A month after the final trial, spring began to bloom across Vermont. But for me, it wasn't just the change of seasons. It was a new beginning. Clarissa, or rather Margaret Ellis, was sentenced to life in prison without parole, after a federal court found her guilty of. Ethan was sentenced to 15 years, his sentence reduced due to cooperation with investigators. He revealed the full extent of his connection with Margaret and admitted he knew far more than he'd claimed. As he was escorted out of court, Ethan turned back to look at me one last time, his lips moving silently. But I didn't need to hear it. That chapter was buried, and I was no longer the woman who clung to that blind love. On the grand opening day of Lauren's Garden Haven, the sky was clear, sunlight pouring gently over rows of blooming hydrangeas. More than 300 guests showed up. Neighbors, friends, and even reporters who had once covered the Clarissa case. But this time, they didn't come to hear a tragic story. They came to witness something grow from the ashes. Savannah stood beside me in a pale green dress, smiling brightly. "Told you. When the light is strong enough, the darkness has nowhere left to hide." Brian was on the other side of the garden, talking with the landscape architects. He had returned to himself. Steady, sincere, and a quiet strength I never realized I'd needed so much. The garden was divided into 4 sections. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. Each with its own palette, named after memories my father once shared with me. At the center stood a large glass house, modeled after the one where he'd nurtured his first blooms. On the glass doors, engraved in delicate script, were the words, "For those who've been broken but still chose to bloom." The crowd fell silent as I stepped up to speak. Seeing the familiar faces of those who had stood by me, Savannah, Brian, the elderly gardener who first taught me to graft roses when I was 16, I felt something deeper than triumph. I felt rebirth. I used to think justice was the end, I began. But really, it's just the beginning. Justice doesn't bring back what was lost, but it gives us the chance to choose again, to live without fear, to trust again, to plant what we thought had died. I turned toward the glass house behind me. And today, I'm not just opening a garden, I'm opening a new chapter. Applause rippled across the grounds, and when I pulled the white cloth from the new sign, I felt my father there, smiling somewhere beyond. Lauren's Garden Haven wasn't just a name. It was a symbol of resilience, truth, and those who rise again after the fall. That evening, after most guests had gone, I returned to the glass house alone. The door was still open. In the corner, a purple orchid had fully bloomed. Beneath it, Brian had quietly placed a wooden plaque that read, "For Miles Reynolds, who planted the seed of truth in seasons of lies." I sat beside the orchid, my hand brushing the soft petals. In that moment, I was no longer the woman betrayed, no longer the one caught in someone else's schemes. I was the daughter who had survived it all, with a heart full of the love my father had sown in me long ago. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of flowers, the earth, the wind through the glass. Once again, I started over from the place where everything had ended, but this time, I didn't look back. I looked toward the sun. And I bloomed. Lauren's story is proof that justice, even when it arrives late, always carries the power of truth and resilience. In the face of loss, betrayal, and pain, she chose not to fall but to rise, to rebuild trust from the ashes of the past. In real life, we can't always avoid those who try to take advantage of us or cause harm, but like Lauren, we can always choose integrity, strength, and renewal, like flowers blooming brightly after a long winter. What do you think about Lauren's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and meaningful stories about family, justice, and the strength to keep going.